Before moving on to discuss this point, we would like each person to reflect. Don't focus too much on the drawing. Reflect on the work you are doing with the parchment. What work is each person doing with their parchment? Let's not get into whether the parchment should be burned or not. It has to be burned. The ego has so many facets that truly speaking of the death of the ego is necessary, because the truth is the truth. But from saying to doing, what a great distance. Anyone attempting to kill an ego, let's imagine that Lucas wants to kill the ego of anger. It would be impossible. We are making it impossible for Lucas to kill the ego of anger if he does not repent of it with just and abundant reason, and if he does not succeed. The ego of anger itself is capable of kneeling and begging to be killed, if you want to know, because the ego of anger, we are talking about anger, and all egos are like that, has ramifications that do not know each other, but are terrible rivals among themselves. I tell you one thing, I was a military man for a little while. I also knew other things. Do you believe that in groups, in the military, for example, there are no enemies among each other in the heat of battle? Do you believe that in an assault where one group attacks a military squadron, how many soldiers or non-commissioned officers or even officers are wishing for a stray bullet to hit someone, a comrade? Do you understand me? Well, those are plays of the same devil. There are proliferations of Joes in different places, centers of the same species as machinery, fighting each other for absolute rivalry that one wants to have, and it is the same. So what Lucas has to do is start working daily in everyday life. But brothers, for God's sake pay attention to me, remembering since when he was very young, which events began to bother him related to that anger. He got angry when they gave him the bottle cold or hot, or when his mom didn't breastfeed him as soon as he asked, so apologize to the Divine Mother for that. He got angry when they made him do his homework, so ask for forgiveness over and over again to the Divine Mother for having been a disobedient and rebellious son, and thus create a schedule of all the moments in his life when he remembers having expressed himself to that demon, to ask for forgiveness from his Divine Mother, and having formed it. An event that one does not ask forgiveness from the mother is poorly studied, and then the tape does not erase the event. And since it exists in the tape, the event becomes reality at any moment, because the mind brings it. 1. Do you understand me? Teacher, do you understand me? Let's see, Samuel says, and I hadn't understood that if a man must cry for something, it is asking his Divine Mother for death. Asking for forgiveness from the Divine Mother. But some say, forgive me, Mother, all that jargon of things I have done wrong, and study them. Study them to erase them, and do the same with lust, with laziness, with everything. That's why it is demanded that every person choose their heads, the head of the legion, because the head is the one that pluralizes itself only until then. I hear brothers saying, my God, give me a little key there for this mind. This mind, of course, is not that it is repeating what it has written since it was born. And then what happens when one has done all that work status in the current life? Then you can ask with the right and moral solvency to ask your Divine Mother to eliminate the tapes and elements from other lives. But as long as we are with this one, we have to deal with this one. Asking for forgiveness for the sin I have committed, well, the intention is valid, but not to kill the ego. That ego does not die like that because one has to go here to the event. And little by little, one remembers when one becomes skillful in remembering all that. When one becomes skillful in remembering all that, at any moment, one says, oh, darn it. I remember when I got so angry and threw a stone at the dog. Oh, that sounded like a drum. That dog, well, don't pay much attention to the dog. Consider that it was an expression of anger and ask your Divine Mother to forgive you, because the pain that dog went through, that pain, will have to come back to him someday, because that ball goes and comes back, yes or yes. And if not, then the Lord's sentence would not be true. So dear brothers, let's get concrete and live scientifically the gnosis. As I say, it happens with lust, with laziness, with everyone. One remembers, oh, I remember when I was lazy, I sent my dad somewhere to do something, to take lunch to the poor old man struggling with hunger working over there. And I sat down and started and lay down to sleep, you know, and lunch is an old man there on the side getting cold, and he and I sleeping. Do you think that's not a sin? Do you have to eat dirt asking your mother to forgive you to be able to eliminate that scourge, and so on for all psychological aggregates? If you do not ask for forgiveness deeply but with sincere repentance, you are not understood. And then the mother, she says, my little one, I forgive you what you have free. But what is there locked up? How is it that it is locked up? And I can't practice up to there. Yes, the guardian of the threshold presents himself to one and says, "But remember Christ. In the name of Christ, I conjure you," says this one is with God, and I don't get involved with that. See, it's the same with that, brothers. We are talking about a scientific night. So many people do not see the transcendence, but that's how it is. We have a psychological trait, study it. We have said this since we wrote that Jewel to the Yellow Dragon. Based on that, study the constellation that rules you, and there you realize what job has gone worse in all comings and goings, and it characterizes you in the constellation where they send you. Why do they send you? For example, a very fornicating person is sent to the constellation, excuse me. I am not saying that because, I am from Taurus, despite being the best sign of the zodiac, but we are labeled with that. So in which sign would they send him? Most likely, they send him to Sagittarius. See, why is it not for a lack of God's love? It is for God's love, so that he gives and gives and gives and realizes one day that he has an enemy monster, which is his psychological trait. Oh, clear, 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 because as he turns around, he doesn't say, "They have me on the bench." So what does he do? A bad comparison. But it turns out, I'll talk again about a comparison that I put to you on occasion. In the Greta, there is a man named Carlos, who is the whole town of the Greta. He is descended from Mr. Carlos. So he has children, 50 children, 200 grandchildren, and 100. I don't know how many great-grandchildren. Suddenly there is a tumult, and they hit Mr. Carlos's grandson. The boys had him, and everything happened. Another tumult comes, they hit Mr. Carlos's son. Another, Saint Dad says the boys. But if suddenly they see the tumult, who did they hit? Mr. Carlos. Then Mr. Carlos there, how can he? Son, bring me the grandchildren and the children, and to the great-great-grandchildren, and to everything, and everything makes sense because they hit the father. The grandfather, man, they don't forgive him, and among all of them, they blame him like that. That's why you have to put a head, and when one puts the head, he's saying, roll over because there's a man here, a woman with the skirts well put, willing to wait for you because he's challenging the guardian of the threshold of that head. Do you understand me? That is to say, it's burying oneself. It's that knife there. Well, it's burying it, but to whom? To the ego. It's a challenge. It's not a matter of challenging someone out there, like the one who was doing the mantras and the shouting to the dog and peace, 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 and they didn't even stop him with a hand. So, one has to know that when challenging such a head, the whole legion of that head trembles. Well, then we come to the 3 ways in which anyone has the ego. Here is one that I would have liked to exist, and I would have painted it closer. That's the one that as soon as they do something to him, he says, growls, shouts, kicks, hits, scratches, pulls hair, and everything. How many Gnostic students don't even bother to realize that at some point, he is the clown playing the role of this demon. The demon has him loose there doing what he wants. And yet he says, it's not that I'm changing, don't believe it. Yes, he's changing a stone for a fist. Previously, he had the revolver. Now he just throws a stone. He's changing. Let's realize it. Let's do a self-examination, and you will see that it happens. One has loose roles that he hasn't even bothered to do anything about. That is the self that at all times and moments comes as an intruder, constantly interfering with everything, doing whatever he pleases. Then comes another type of self. It is the one that, by will, has them tied. But what does 1.1 Diablera tied do? What does it do? At any moment, one of them comes loose, and that one unleashes the others. And look where the meek one was. Don't you see that we can't have him muzzled, believing that with that, he is dying, and much less having him loose, thinking that he is changing. So, Master Samuel talks about the knife of consciousness. This, instead of having it loose, having it tied, he understood it, and he stabbed it. What is the stab? Every time he manifests himself, locate the person and say, my mother, help me because the time of the fight has come, and instead of saying, look why this wretch comes here to ruin my day, not saying that to the poor person who comes to upset his ego, saying it to him, who is the one claiming, and stab him with the firm resolution that in that event, the ego dies. 1. Repressing chose. So already, as I tell you, we want it to be clear what it means to have the ego loose. One knows when words are coming out and expressions of a loose self that he doesn't even have tied. And he knows when he has the self tight there because he shuts up, but inside, he's melting. There is no death there. Who is doing it, at least first, has to tie it up to then stab it. He is already doing part of the work, but don't think because there are people who can last 40, 50 years tying ego here, untying there and well, a life of desperate devil. And the prayer of the walker here in this. I say that if I encounter obstacles, don't be the ones I've set myself. And one of the main obstacles we set for ourselves is not studying the ego thoroughly. It is a brutal obstacle, for one cannot transcend death. So, let's realize, brothers, we have to tie the legion. But start killing 1x1. I would like any concept you have about this in the artery. The recordings are there. The recording. One remembers. It's not that life itself helps him. Life helps him in the work. And then something else happens too. Be careful with that. A lover or a prostitute says, "Oh, I remember. This lust demon. I'm going to catch him, buddy," and starts remembering certain events over there and stays there, nourishing the devil, thinking that he is repenting. That's a ridiculous role and more dangerous than a monkey with a blade. The event, no matter how beautiful it may have seemed to the ego, the event is brought to memory to disintegrate the actor, not for the event to continue living in the mind. The day we eliminate events, our minds will be completely blank, and whoever doesn't think has awakened because he sees that one is asleep precisely due to the mechanics and duality of the mind. What does one do? He blanks out the mind. See, let's go. I saw it, and since life cannot stagnate there, I continue. So, it goes on to waking up, but first, it has to go through being, through not being a thinker, to then wake up. Well, who has something to say? It is taught by the beloved teachers who are guiding this work, that people who have not known the teaching for 3 years, and are not living it, should not challenge such things, because that person, during those first 3 years, is subjected to the test of earth, the test of water, of air, of fire, and is subjected to the test of the guardian of the threshold. So, subjecting a person who still has no grip on consciousness, will, and understanding to a lot of tests, would expose him to come out defeated in the work.